Hey there, everyone. Tonight, let's gently drift back to a time when welcoming a new life into the world was an act of profound courage, fraught with risks that are almost unimaginable to us today. We're going to explore the ancient truth about childbirth, a subject often romanticized in art and literature, but in reality, was a perilous journey for both mother and child. It's a gentle reminder of how far we've come, and perhaps, how much we take for granted. Before we embark on this quiet historical journey, take a moment to dim the lights a little more. Maybe grab your favorite cozy blanket, settle into your most comfortable spot, and let the soft sounds of this story wash over you. If you're listening in, why not drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Knowing we're sharing this quiet moment with so many of you helps create a sense of calm. Alright, lights down a bit further. Let's gently drift into tonight's historical journey. For countless millennia, long before hospitals, antibiotics, or even the most basic understanding of germ theory, the act of childbirth was perhaps the most dangerous endeavor a woman could undertake. It was a threshold between life and death, constantly crossed with immense bravery and often silent suffering. The mortality rates for both mothers and infants were astonishingly high, a stark reality that permeated every aspect of ancient societies, influencing social structures, religious beliefs, and daily rituals. Every birth was, in essence, a gamble against overwhelming odds. In ancient Egypt, a civilization renowned for its sophisticated medical knowledge in some areas, childbirth was still largely an affair of traditional wisdom, magical incantations, and practical, albeit often unsanitary, methods. Pregnant women would often reside in special birthing houses or on specific birthing bricks, which sometimes featured depressions for the mother's feet or were carved with images of protective deities like Tauret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth. These settings, while perhaps symbolically comforting, offered little in the way of true medical safety. The process was primarily managed by women, typically experienced older women from the community or family, serving as informal midwives. Their knowledge was passed down through generations, a blend of observation, herbal remedies, and ritualistic practices meant to appease spirits or invoke divine aid. Imagine yourself, a young woman in ancient Egypt, perhaps named Nefertari, awaiting the arrival of your first child. You are in a small, enclosed room, perhaps made of mud brick, the air heavy with the scent of incense and dried herbs. You are seated on a birthing stool, or perhaps squatting on those birthing bricks, feeling the immense pressure building. Around you, women murmur encouraging words, fanning you gently in the heat. There are no pain relievers, no sterile gloves. The midwife's hands, though experienced, are rough, perhaps stained from other tasks earlier in the day. The fear would be a constant, low thrum beneath the waves of pain. You might press against the wall, trying to find leverage, your breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The sounds of other lives in the bustling city outside would feel incredibly distant, your world narrowed to this small space, this intense physical ordeal. In ancient Greece, as philosophical and medical thought began to flourish, childbirth remained primarily a domestic event, overseen by midwives known as Mai. These women were often respected figures in their communities, possessing practical skills in guiding a delivery. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, and other Greek physicians did write about midwifery, but their understanding of female anatomy and physiology was still limited by today's standards. They believed that certain postures could aid delivery, and often prescribed various herbal concoctions to hasten labor or alleviate pain, though their efficacy was questionable. Greek birthing rooms, much like Egyptian ones, were often simple and private, a sanctuary where women supported women. Consider yourself a woman in ancient Athens, perhaps called Talia, enduring the long hours of labor. Your home, though humble, feels vast with your struggle. The midwife, a kind-faced woman with knowing eyes, whispers encouragement, wiping your brow with a damp cloth. She might encourage you to walk, or to adopt a squatting position, believing that gravity would assist the baby's descent. You might be offered a bitter brew of herbs, meant to strengthen your contractions. The air is warm, perhaps humid, and the only sounds are your strained breathing and the midwife's soft instructions. There's a deep sense of vulnerability, relying entirely on the knowledge passed down through generations, hoping for a safe passage. The risk of infection was ever present, though unknown. Any tear, any tool, even hands not perfectly clean, could introduce unseen dangers. The thought of what could go wrong would hover at the edge of your awareness, pushed back only by the immediacy of each contraction. Moving to ancient Rome, society placed a high value on fertility and large families. Childbirth was a central event, often taking place in the home, surrounded by female family members and a midwife, or obstetrix. Roman medical writers like Serenus of Ephesus, in his work, Gynaecia, provided some of the most comprehensive ancient texts on obstetrics and gynecology. He detailed suitable birthing postures, the importance of cleanliness, though not in a modern sterile sense, and methods for dealing with complications like breech presentations. Despite these advancements in theoretical knowledge, the practical realities often fell short. Tools were still basic, and hygiene remained a significant challenge. Imagine being a Roman matron, perhaps named Livia, in the throes of labor. Your home, perhaps grand, has been transformed into a birthing chamber. The obstetrix, a woman of authority and experience, directs the scene. She might have an array of simple tools, hooks, specula, or even sharp instruments, used only in dire circumstances, often with tragic results for the mother. The focus is on expediting the birth. You might be given wine to dull the pain, or a charm to wear, invoking the goddess Lucina. The room is filled with tension, the whispers of attendants, and your own cries. The knowledge that many women did not survive childbirth, or that their babies were stillborn, would be a chilling undercurrent to your experience. The unspoken fear, the reliance on fate and the midwife's skill, would make every contraction a step closer to an uncertain outcome. Across these ancient civilizations, despite their unique cultural practices and varying levels of medical sophistication, certain grim commonalities existed. The absence of antisepsis meant that puerperal fever, or childbed fever, was a silent, deadly killer. Infection, often introduced by unwashed hands or contaminated instruments, could quickly claim the lives of mothers who had survived the arduous labor itself. Hemorrhage was another frequent cause of maternal death, with no means to effectively control severe bleeding. And for infants, the challenges were immense. Premature birth, birth injuries, and neonatal infections meant that many newborns did not survive their first few days or weeks. Every cry of a healthy newborn was a profound blessing, a testament to sheer luck and resilience in a world where the odds were stacked against them. These were not just statistics. They were lived realities, deeply personal and often tragically short, as the Roman Empire eventually gave way to the fragmented landscapes of the Middle Ages. The core challenges of childbirth, sadly, remained largely unchanged, if not intensified by the loss of some classical medical knowledge. This was a period where local customs, deeply ingrained superstitions, and the unwavering, if limited, wisdom of community figures became the bedrock of maternal care. The stage was set not in grand birthing rooms of marble, but in the humble, often crowded, homes of everyday people. In this era, the central figure in almost every birth narrative was the midwife, a woman known in various languages as sage femme, wise woman in French, or simply wise woman in English. She was not a formally trained medical professional in the modern sense. Universities and medical schools were nascent institutions, largely inaccessible to women, and their curricula focused on theoretical knowledge far removed from the practical, hands-on realities of delivery. Instead, the midwife's authority stemmed from her accumulated experience. She had witnessed countless births, felt the subtle shifts in a laboring body, and understood the rhythms of life and death within her community. Her tools were her hands, her intuition, and a collection of folk remedies passed down through generations. Imagine yourself, perhaps a young woman named Isolde, living in a small, thatched cottage in a medieval village. The chill of the dawn seeps through the cracks in the walls. You are in labor, and the pains are intensifying. Your husband, anxious and helpless, has already fetched old Agnes, the village midwife. Agnes is a woman with weathered hands and kind, but firm, eyes. She has delivered most of the children in this village, including your own siblings. Her presence brings a profound, if fragile, sense of comfort. You cling to her words, her steady touch, as if they are life rafts in a tumultuous sea. She might encourage you to walk, to lean against a wall, or to squat over a birthing stool, a simple, often three-legged seat designed to use gravity's aid. The room, filled with the smoky scent of a peat fire, would also carry the faint, earthy smell of herbs Agnes might be brewing. The midwife's knowledge, while practical, was often intertwined with deeply held superstitions and religious beliefs. These weren't necessarily seen as separate from medicine. Rather, they were integral to the understanding of health and illness. Difficult labors might be attributed to evil spirits, unconfessed sins, or curses. To counteract these unseen forces, midwives would employ a fascinating array of rituals and charms. They might scatter certain herbs around the bed, believing their aroma would ward off malevolent entities. They might recite prayers or verses from the Bible, or even pagan incantations, to invoke divine or magical assistance. Objects thought to possess protective powers, a specific stone, a piece of wood, or even a particular bone, might be placed under the mattress or held by the laboring woman. You might find Agnes placing a small, carved wooden figure of the Virgin Mary near your head, or perhaps making the sign of the cross over your swollen belly. She might whisper ancient rhymes, her voice a low drone against your grunts of pain, believing these words held power to ease the passage. The air would be thick with unspoken fears and fervent hopes. The line between what was medically effective and what was spiritually comforting was blurred, almost non-existent. For the laboring woman, any perceived aid, whether physical or spiritual, was welcomed with desperate hope. For instance, the use of birthing girdles was common. These were strips of cloth, sometimes inscribed with religious texts, worn around the abdomen during labor, believed to offer protection and ease the birth. Some midwives might carry a birthing stone, or a magical root, thought to reduce pain. If labor stalled, a midwife might administer a purgative to clear the way, or try to startle the woman to encourage contractions. There are even records of strange practices, like placing a hot poultice of pigeon droppings on the mother's head, or tying a snake's skin around her thigh, all born from a blend of desperation and a lack of scientific understanding. While these practices strike us as bizarre and potentially harmful today, in their context, they were the best available tools in a world where direct medical intervention was limited and risky. The academic world, often dominated by men, slowly began to take an interest in obstetrics, though often from a distance. University-trained physicians, if they were involved at all, would often supervise or advise rather than directly attend births, particularly in humble settings. Their knowledge, derived from ancient texts rather than practical experience, was often less useful than the midwife's hands-on expertise. It wasn't until much later that male doctors began to actively participate in deliveries, a shift that would bring both new techniques and new controversies. So, in your medieval cottage, the birth process unfolds. Agnes works tirelessly, her face etched with concentration, occasionally muttering to herself or to you. She might press warm cloths to your perineum, or gently massage your back. The sounds of your labor, the midwife's soft words, the crackling fire, and perhaps the distant lowing of cattle, would be the only accompaniment. There is no sterile field, no precise measurement, no advanced monitoring. Just human hands, human will, and the deep, abiding hope that this new life will emerge safely, despite the overwhelming odds. The air might be damp, the bedding humble, but the focus is entirely on the primal act of birth. And even with all the superstitions, the core of the midwife's role was her unwavering presence and her lived experience, a quiet testament to human resilience in the face of nature's most demanding challenge. As the medieval period waned and the grandeur of the Renaissance unfurled, society began to stratify further, creating distinct worlds for the wealthy elite and the common populace. This division, however, did not always translate into better outcomes for those at the top, especially when it came to the deeply intimate and inherently risky process of childbirth. In the opulent halls of palaces and the sprawling estates of the aristocracy, birth became not just a biological event, but a theatrical performance, laden with elaborate rituals, social pressures, and a surprising lack of genuine medical efficacy. Imagine yourself now, a high-ranking noblewoman in a grand 16th century European court, perhaps named Eleanor. You are pregnant with what is hoped to be an heir, and the stakes are incredibly high. Unlike your humble counterpart in a village cottage, your birthing chamber is a lavish affair, perhaps adorned with tapestries, heavy velvet drapes, and intricately carved furniture. But this splendor can feel like a gilded cage. You are not alone with a trusted midwife. Instead, the room is teeming with people. There are not one, but several midwives, often jostling for influence. There are noble ladies in waiting, gossiping courtiers, perhaps even a confessor, and most ominously, male physicians, often reluctant to soil their hands with the actual delivery, yet quick to offer theoretical advice or to intervene with drastic measures if things went awry. The air is thick with anticipation, whispered prayers, and an underlying current of anxiety. Every sigh, every groan you make, is scrutinized. The rituals surrounding aristocratic childbirth were incredibly complex and often designed more for public display and the affirmation of social status than for the comfort or safety of the mother. For instance, the bed in which you lay might be specifically blessed, adorned with symbols of fertility and protection. Certain prayers would be recited at specific intervals. The room itself would be filled with specific scents, sometimes pleasant, sometimes overpowering, meant to purify the air or ward off evil. You might be given special concoctions, powdered pearls, exotic herbs, or even ground-up unicorn horn, if one could be procured, all believed to possess mystical properties to ease labor or ensure a healthy child. These weren't necessarily based on medical understanding, but on ancient beliefs in sympathetic magic and divine intervention. The male physician, an increasingly prominent figure in courtly medicine, often approached childbirth with a mixture of academic theory and a distinct lack of practical experience in actual deliveries, which were still considered the domain of women. They might be skilled in anatomy, thanks to illicit dissections, but their interventions were often clumsy and sometimes harmful. They were more accustomed to dissecting cadavers than navigating the unpredictable nuances of a live birth. Their presence was often seen as a sign of advanced care, but in reality, they might introduce more complications, particularly infection, as their understanding of hygiene was no better than the midwives'. Consider the immense social pressure on you, the noblewoman. The birth of an heir, especially a male heir, was paramount for the continuation of your lineage and the stability of your family's power. Failure to produce a living, healthy child could have severe repercussions, from political instability to personal disgrace. This pressure would weigh heavily on you, adding a mental burden to the already excruciating physical one. Every contraction, every push, was not just for your survival, but for the future of your house. The whispered prayers around you, the anxious faces of your attendants, all serve as a constant reminder of what is at stake. You are not simply a woman giving birth, you are a vessel for dynastic continuation. There was also the uncomfortable reality of privacy, or rather, the lack thereof. For a noblewoman, childbirth was rarely a private affair. The room might be filled with witnesses, not just family, but often government officials, lawyers, or members of the court, all present to officially attest to the birth and prevent any claims of a swapped or illegitimate child. Imagine trying to endure the most vulnerable and painful experience of your life, under the watchful eyes of strangers, knowing that your every grunt and scream is being judged. The need to maintain composure, even in agonizing pain, would be an added torment. Scholars often point out a paradoxical truth of courtly births. While access to resources like multiple midwives, physicians, and exotic remedies seem to offer an advantage, the sheer number of people in the birthing chamber, coupled with their often unwashed hands and instruments, inadvertently increase the risk of infection. Puerperal fever, a devastating bacterial infection, was a silent killer in these crowded, unsanitary environments, often claiming lives despite the presence of the best medical minds of the era. The very efforts to ensure legitimacy and provide comfort often created conditions ripe for tragedy. Even in the most lavish settings, the tools available were still rudimentary. Forceps, in their earliest forms, were clunky and dangerous. Interventions, when attempted, were often desperate measures, resulting in severe trauma to both mother and child. Pain relief remained rudimentary. The mother might be given wine, opium, or a sedative like laudanum, but effective pain management was a distant dream. The cries of the laboring mother, though perhaps muffled by thick tapestries, still echoed the raw, untamed nature of birth in an era devoid of modern medical interventions. So, while the surroundings might have been grand, the experience of childbirth for the ancient and medieval elite often remained just as perilous, if not more so, than for their poorer counterparts. The dirty truth was that wealth and status offered little true protection against the fundamental dangers of birth. The risks were universal, transcending social hierarchy, reminding everyone that in the face of nature's most profound act, all were ultimately vulnerable. The soft candlelight in the luxurious chamber would cast long, dancing shadows, adding to the silent drama of life clinging to life. As the grand eras of empires and medieval kingdoms gave way to the early modern period, the understanding of human anatomy deepened, and surgical practices, however crude, slowly began to emerge from the shadows of barbershops and back alleys. Yet, for all the burgeoning knowledge, the ultimate challenge of childbirth, especially when complications arose, often pushed the boundaries of what was survivable. It's here, in the midst of desperation and the dawning light of anatomical insight, that we find the origins of one of the most drastic and often tragic interventions in human history, the caesarean section. Imagine, if you will, the early 19th century. A labor has gone terribly wrong. The mother, after days of agonizing, fruitless contractions, is weakening, her life ebbing away. The baby is stuck, perhaps in an impossible position, or too large to pass through the birth canal. In a time before effective anesthesia, before antisepsis, and before detailed understanding of internal bleeding, what could be done? For centuries, the caesarean section was almost exclusively a post-mortem procedure. Its primary purpose was not to save the mother, who was already considered lost, but to save the infant, or at least to baptize it before its final breath. This was often driven by religious decree, ensuring the newborn's soul could enter heaven. You are a witness to such a scene, perhaps a nervous family member or an apprentice to the local surgeon in a dimly lit room. The mother has just passed away, her face pale, her body still. The surgeon, a solemn figure with tools laid out on a rough wooden table, prepares for the grim task. The instruments are simple: a sharp knife, maybe some crude forceps. There is no urgency in saving the mother's life, as that hope is gone. Instead, a chilling, almost ritualistic precision guides the surgeon's hand as he makes the incision. The air is heavy with sorrow, yet a flicker of desperate hope remains for the tiny, unseeing life within. The thought that a child might be brought forth, even as its mother's breath has ceased, is both a macabre necessity and a testament to the era's profound desire for continued life, no matter the cost. The name itself, caesarean section, is steeped in legend, often linked to Julius Caesar, though historical evidence suggests he was born naturally. The term more likely derives from the Latin verb cedere, meaning to cut. Early accounts describe instances, often folkloric, of babies being cut from mothers, but these were almost always in circumstances where the mother was already dead or certainly doomed. The idea of performing such a major abdominal surgery on a living woman with any hope of her survival was practically unthinkable. The risks were astronomical: uncontrolled hemorrhage, immediate and overwhelming infection, and the utter lack of pain management. The very thought would fill one with terror. Even when the procedure was attempted on living women in desperate situations, the success rate for the mother was minuscule. The first documented successful caesarean section on a living woman where both mother and child survived is often attributed to a Swiss pig gelder, Jacob Neuffer, in 1500, supposedly on his own wife after all midwives had failed. While fascinating, the details are sparse and hard to verify. More widely accepted, successful cases for the mother didn't appear until much later, and even then, they were isolated, heroic exceptions rather than a viable medical option. The abdomen would be cut open, the uterus too, and then, perhaps with crude stitching or no stitching at all, the hope was that the wounds would simply close and not become infected. You can almost feel the burning pain, the utter helplessness, as such an operation, without any anesthetic, was performed. As the 19th century progressed, and medical understanding slowly improved, particularly in the areas of anatomy and, crucially, anesthesia, the potential for caesarean sections to save both lives began to emerge. The introduction of ether and then chloroform in the 1840s and 1850s transformed surgery, allowing for longer, more complex procedures without the patient's agonizing screams. However, infection or sepsis remained a formidable foe. Even with a seemingly successful surgery, the mother often succumbed to puerperal fever days later, her body overwhelmed by bacteria introduced during the unsterile procedure. The air of the operating room, though perhaps no longer filled with screams of pain, was still heavy with the unseen danger of microscopic invaders. It wasn't until the very late 19th century, with the widespread adoption of antisepsis and later, asepsis, truly sterile surgical environments and practices, championed by figures like Joseph Lister, that caesarean sections began to transition from a death sentence for the mother to a viable, life-saving procedure. The systematic cleaning of hands, instruments, and operating fields, and later, the use of sterile gowns and drapes, dramatically reduced the incidence of post-operative infection. This gradual, painstaking shift was nothing short of revolutionary. So, in these older times, when faced with an obstructed labor, the choices were brutally few. The decision to perform a caesarean section was almost always a last, desperate act, a gamble against insurmountable odds. It was a stark reminder of the fragile line between life and death in an era without modern medical interventions, where even the most heroic efforts were often thwarted by unseen threats. The silence that followed such a procedure, broken only by a newborn's cry, would have been filled with profound relief, but also the deep, lingering grief for the life that was lost. As we gently drift away from these historical echoes of medical desperation, we can almost feel the quiet hum of modern medical precision and the warmth of sterile environments. The shadows of ancient practices, where life often hung by the thinnest thread, fade into the mists of time, replaced by the gentle reassurance of advanced care. The terror of the past gives way to the ease of the present, a testament to centuries of quiet struggle and tireless innovation. Let the anxieties of yesterday's dangers melt away, leaving only the soft cadence of this story to guide you into a peaceful night. May your dreams be free from ancient pains, filled instead with the calm of a world that learned to heal, one life at a time. Good night.